Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to the third and final day of presentations for the 45th Annual Symposium on the American Indian. For those who haven't seen me up here before this week or before on campus, my name is Sarah Barnett, and I serve as the Director of the Center for Tribal Studies and Chair of the American Indian Heritage Committee here on campus. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Erin Frazier, who's the current president of our NSU ACES chapter, who is actually hosting this morning's keynote speaker. So Erin, come on up to the stage, and she will provide the introduction for our keynote speaker. Let's welcome her, please, so she don't feel so nervous.
Welcome to today's morning general session. I'm Erin Frazier. I'm a junior majoring in computer science and the president of ACES. I'd like to introduce the officers and members. We have my secretary and best friend, Sky Wildcat, my treasurer, Sharice Monroe, and my PR, Derek Whaley. Together, we make up the NSU ACES chapter, and our goal is to help the Native American students, particularly in STEM fields, learn about opportunities and to connect with other students pursuing similar careers. We do this by going to conferences in different places and other events. We recently went to the Region 4 conference in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and got to meet the other schools in our region. Our next event is the Leadership Summit in Chandler, Arizona. Our speaker for this session is Devin Mehisua. Devin is the Cora Lee Beers Prize Teaching Professor in International Cultural Understanding at the University of Kansas. She holds a PhD in American History from Texas Christian University. Her career has been devoted to the empowerment and well-being of indigenous peoples. She served as editor of the American Indian Quarterly for 9 years. Her research, writing, and speaking focuses on decolonization strategies and is one of the few indigenous writers who successfully writes nonfiction and fiction. She regularly speaks nationally and internationally about issues pertaining to empowerment of indigenous peoples. Her works are cited and reprinted in hundreds of publications, and her books and essays are used in classrooms across the world. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you very much for the invitation. The last time I spoke at this conference was in 1988. I was working on my doctoral dissertation on the Cherokee Female Seminary, and that's 29 years ago. And I do have a t-shirt. I just could not find it. So I know it's hidden someplace. For you elders who may have been around at that time, that was the year that Russell Means came in with his AIM entourage, maybe, and a couple of guys had their machetes with them. So I remember that very, very clearly. So it really is my pleasure to talk about Nere Ware. First off, I'm not Cherokee, so I want to make that clear, not trying to appropriate anything. I'm Choctaw. I'm also Chickasaw descendant. My husband, Josh, is here. He's Comanche. And so what I have for you today is, it's a little bit about the book that I have written about Christy that will be coming out next spring. And I realize that what I'm doing is preaching to the choir because so many of y'all are related to him. I do want to have a great shout out to Roy, who has really helped me tremendously. This is my favorite picture of him. This is in front of the spring, where many of y'all have been. This is where Christy and his wife Nancy, got their water, and they lived right up the hill. And so Roy and I would be on Facebook or going back and forth, and I'd say, Roy, I found this. Can you believe this? And so we'd be going back and forth with this new information that was discovered about Christy. So he got me straightened out as far as the family, because you cannot talk about Christy without the family. And if one thing I will never forget, Roy has said, my family is who I am. I love my family. So it isn't just about Christy. What happened to him didn't just happen in a bubble. There were many, many other people who were affected by this, and after his death, things didn't just stop. It continued. It was like a huge boulder dropped in a pond, and the ripples just kept going, and we still feel it today. So one of my major issues here that I discuss in this book is images of Christy. How is it that we know about him today? Of course, we've got family testimonies, family stories, there's archival data, but what I did was I looked at literally hundreds, if not thousands, of newspaper articles, Wild West stories, blogs. Very crazy things have been written about him. This is the cover of the Chronicles of Oklahoma. I had an article about him that came out a year ago, and I like these pictures of him, but if you look very closely, if you take a look at pictures of before Maples was killed and after Maples was killed, we see a real difference in him. We can see the stress starting to show. But for those of you who aren't really familiar with him, in a nutshell, Nede Wade Christie, son of Watt Christie, was a Cotulla Cherokee who in 1887 was accused of killing U.S. Deputy Marshal Dan Maples, who was in Tahlequah. Despite there being a variety of other people in town at the same time who could have been the likely culprits, eventually he was accused of doing the crime, and so for 5 years he avoided capture, and finally in November of 1892 his house was blown up and he was shot. Okay, so that's kind of the foundation in a nutshell story, but then it just takes off in all directions from there. This is Dan Maples. There's only one picture that we know of him, and we really don't know a whole lot about him. What is written about Dan Maples really happened after his death. He didn't have an opportunity to tell us or show us how great and wonderful a marshal he was, so the Wild West writers retroactively tell us he was. So this is part of what I discuss. And of course, as y'all know, this is Seminary Hall, and where are we from here? Maples was just shot not very far from Seminary Hall. As probably most of you know, we could just run out the door and probably go to the general area. So history is alive, and it's right here. Okay, the chapter that I have is entitled Bad Company, and this is about when Maples was killed. So we've got a variety of characters, and I call them characters because there's quite a bit of information, particularly about John Paris and Bub Traynor. I couldn't find pictures of them, but I did find Bub Traynor's signature, so there it is. All of these guys had rap sheets. All of these men had been previously accused and convicted of a variety of crimes, from whiskey running primarily, but also robbing, thieving, just being drunk, general bad character. Isaac Parker at this time was, he is the judge at Fort Smith. And so what happened after Maples was killed, there was a lot of confusion. So I'm making a very long, complicated story, extremely short. Those men that were just listed here, they all were initially accused of possibly killing Maples. They went to Fort Smith and they presented their case in front of Isaac Parker. Well, I didn't do it. And so what they did, basically what it comes down to is Paris and Traynor were kind of accusing each other. There wasn't anybody here in this list initially that was accusing Christie of doing the shooting. Not initially. What happened was all of these men managed to wiggle out of these charges. And unfortunately for Christie, and this is what I think, Christie was very well aware of what the United States government was capable of doing. His family was removed in 1830s, right, to Indian Territory, and he had family members who died on the trail or who died shortly after they got here. He didn't trust the government. He did not trust what they said. Consequently, because he was a Cotulla, which meant he was very, anti these people, moving into Indian Territory, taking tribal resources. You've got all these white men wanting to marry Indian women to get resources, right? He was anti-railroad. He very much was a staunch traditionalist, and he wanted to maintain that. Consequently, he may have been a little concerned about what would happen if he went to Fort Smith. And I do think, however, that if he had gone to Fort Smith, I think he probably would have been able to get out of the situation. But he just made that unfortunate, fatal mistake. So Fort Smith, he was afraid of the gallows, right? So if you haven't been there, you can go, you can take a picture, all that. Fort Smith. Now the book that's coming out, University of Oklahoma Press, it was initially called Nedewade Christie because this is how he was referred to by his family, right? But the press has informed me that the board of directors prefers it be called Ned Christie because nobody knows who Nedewade is. And so if you want to find him on Google, they may not find it. So I think this is going to change a little bit. I wanted this picture because what I am doing is I'm not portraying him as an outlaw or a hero. I want him to be portrayed here as a very serene looking person who's very complicated, and we'll just figure out what he is like after we read the book. So that's why I didn't want to have any kind of weaponry, I guess, on the cover, as a lot of people like to do. Now, why am I doing this? A lot of people think, like I said, that after Christie, after he died, that was the end of it. A lot of people seem to think that it was only Christie that was involved in violence, perhaps. That was not the case. A previous book that I did was Choctaw Crime and Punishment, and this was about the intense violence that was going on in the Choctaw Nation at the same time as all of this violence is going on across Indian Territory and indeed here in the Cherokee Nation. And in 1884, this is only 3 years before the death of Maples, my great-great-grandfather was a Choctaw Light Horseman, and he also was the sheriff of Sugarloaf County, which is in Mushelatobi District. He was a nationalist as well, and he was running, as Christie wanted to be, on the Cherokee National Council. My ancestor wanted to be on the Choctaw National Council. So the day of the elections, he was waylaid by some progressive Choctaws who literally beat his brains out on the side of the road. It's very well documented. And so in the process of me investigating all this about my family and all the history, I found that a lot of the people that were involved in all this Choctaw violence were involved in the violence going on in the Cherokee Nation as well. So what I was finding, when I'm finding all this Choctaw stuff, I'm running across Christie's name all the time. And so some of these men who did go to Fort Smith were there at the same time as Bobtail and Traynor and Coon and all of those people. So there's a great deal of overlap. And maybe you've heard of Cylon Lewis. Cylon Lewis was a prominent Choctaw nationalist who he was very disgruntled with how the Choctaw Nation was going. We had too many Choctaws making way too much money at the expense of the traditionalists. And so he went on a killing spree throughout the Choctaw Nation, and he is the one who ended up coming back for his execution. And that was just 2 years after Christie died. So the federal government is paying very, very close attention because the Choctaw Nation was under martial law at the same time that Christie is still in his home in 1890. So eyes are on Cherokees and Choctaws right now. So images and stories. Where do we get all this information about Christie? There are very few stories about Christie prior to 1892, prior to his death. There are a few stories that pop up, in 1890, and it's only because the marshals are speaking out. And so like I said, there's just hundreds and hundreds of these stories, and they all kind of have the same commonality. He's this wild and crazy outlaw. He's a bad Indian. I highlighted the one from the Daily Oklahoman because I think it's the most kind of overwrought and excitable. A man who had fought a greater number of battles with the officers of the government than any other outlaw known to civilization. I mean, that's pretty impressive, right? So where in the world do they come up with that? Well, you have to understand what newspapers and newspaper men are doing during this time period. They want people to buy their newspapers. So when you have these crazy stories, more people want to get a hold of them and they want to read it. It's very exciting. And the papers aren't just showing up around here. They are showing up in Minnesota, California, New York. So what comes out of Muskogee and Tahlequah is being telegraphed all around. So if you think that stopped, decades ago, it didn't. Maybe some of y'all saw this one that Dave Ferris wrote in the Edmond Life and Leisure, Edmond, Oklahoma, right? He is still playing on to all of these stereotypes of Christie. He's talking about him as, being very violent and the cabin gang, whatever that is. Somebody created this cabin gang because it sounds exciting. He has just got the most dynamic criminal career. So people are still doing this. You can look online, and a lot of people are starting to become a little more sympathetic, but a lot of people are still hanging on to this old Wild West stuff. The other thing here that people were doing is, this is kind of your laundry list. Again, you take deputy marshal, Cherokees, children, women, innocent bystanders, and you plug in numbers. It's almost as if everybody's trying to outdo each other. So here we've got 1, but then we've got 2, then we got 8, then we got 10, we got 13. So it's making him, more violent and, this bigger than life character that absolutely had to be done away with. And that's what they're doing. They're rationalizing why it was that he was killed. The same thing happened to other very prominent Cherokees. Zeke Proctor, Starr, Mose Miller, Bill Pigeon. All of these guys have a lot of information about them. They have a lot of crazy stories that have been produced about them. In fact, the book was 70 or 80 pages longer than it has ended up being because I kept writing about these guys. I kept going off in more directions, bringing them into the story, and I was told, no, you got to keep bringing it down. So maybe, I'll do something with them later. But really, all of these men suffered the same sort of character assassination as Christy. As far as images go, there are very few images that we have of Christy, and if you know anything about Billy the Kid, there's really that one image. And if you think about how much has been done with that one image of Billy the Kid, I mean, you look at him, he's looking kind of, I'm ready to shoot you. This is where a lot of the stories come from, just that one picture. However, all these initial stories about Christy, there weren't any pictures associated. They didn't include any pictures in the newspaper. So it was up to the writers to create this imagery. So as you're reading about him, you're forming something in your mind about perhaps what he looks like. So if you take a look, once again, these two pictures side by side, over there on the left, that's the one you see online, isn't it? That's the picture that always shows up in the Wild West literature. He's got 1, 2, 3 weapons, right? He's got bullets around his waist, and people like to imagine he's probably got a Bowie knife, on his, under his pants or something. So this is the image people like of him. Now, the reason that they do this, the reason that these stories just get so crazy and they don't tell us about what he was really like is not all that hard to understand, because in 1885, as y'all know, he was elected to the Cherokee National Council under Chief Bushyhead. This was a very, very important, prominent position, and I think that a lot of people, when they see National Council, they don't really know what that means. You have to be cognizant of the U.S. government. You have to know the Cherokee traditional ways of governance, how it has changed through time. You have to be thoughtful. You have to be a critical thinker. He didn't just sit there at the table twiddling his thumbs at these meetings. I looked at almost, I think, every Cherokee House and Senate and Council document. I think between the Cherokee Female Seminary, this project, and then what I do with Indigenous Foodways and Health, and the changing health of Cherokees and the other 5 tribes, I think I looked at almost every page. And if you take a look at your Cherokee Constitution and laws, if you look at the date, you can see that is when he was on the council. So he is involved in the writing and the creation of these laws. So what I found his name all over the place. He's in just hundreds of pages of documents. He did a lot of things, and this is just a few of the things he was involved in. Pardoning convicts, appropriating money to furnish the Capitol, but then other stuff. One thing he spent an enormous amount of time doing, and I try to imagine what this was like for him, piles of papers of these men who wanted to marry Cherokee women. Because if you were a white guy, you wanted to marry a Cherokee woman, you had to produce documents or letters of your good character, okay? And then the council is going to look at this, consider it, and decide, should we let you do this or not? So he was wrestling with that. He also made comments and decisions about the railroads. about the ranchers, people that were coming in, because when ranchers came in, you don't just have a few little cows nibbling stuff. These things come in and they destroy your land, right? And also, you had people who wanted to rent your timberland, okay? And so you don't just cut down a few trees. There are some real issues with environmental destruction here and in other nations. They come in and wipe out your trees. So you had to be very thoughtful about how you're going to combat this stuff. So that is what he did. This is what he did. This is important. But you never see this in Wild West writing. And I think it is because if you're going to write about Christie being a murderer and an outlaw and somebody who's just this big, bad, terrible guy, but you say, oh, and he was a member of the Cherokee National Council, people who are reading this will say, well, wait a minute, why would he do that? What do you mean National Council? Then if you have to explain everything a National Council person does, it starts getting really complicated. People may ask, well, maybe he didn't do it. Maybe he wasn't guilty. And then the newspaper men, they don't know how to explain it, right? Also, at the same time that Christie is dealing with all this, you have to remember things are going on in the rest of the country. In 1890, Bigfoot and the Mini-Conjous were massacred at Wounded Knee. Tribes are being confined to reservations. The Apache Wars are still going on in the Southwest. So people don't know really how to categorize Christie. You know, and in fact, the majority of the newspaper articles that I looked at, they don't even mention that he's Indian. They don't even say he's Cherokee. He is just an outlaw because they don't know how to describe him. He's not anything like Sitting Bull. You know, it's just he's just too different. He's too sophisticated. So that's kind of an interesting little twist, I think, in these stories. So anyway, like I said, they don't mention anything about it. And in fact, if they had mentioned he was a Kituwa, then you're going to have to explain what a Kituwa is. And people aren't going to get it, and it just makes the story too long. It's just much easier just to make him a crazy bad guy. So tall tales, these tall tales are usually told by the people who win. We know that. Anybody who studies history, the winners get to tell the story. The stories about Christie are also told by people who wish they had been involved with the Christie episode. There are so many stories of people who say, well, I was shot by Christie, or, you know, I met him, he was my good buddy, you know, he told me this and he told me that. And, you know, you do some research on the person who's doing the talking and you realize there's no way that they could have even met him. It wasn't possible. Also, tall tales come from the lawmen. These lawmen granted interviews to newspapers after Christie was dead, and they seemed to know that they were these myths in the making, so they're contributing to their own mythologies. So many of these lawmen, and if you go down the line with all those people that were present at Christie's death, they're all saying, well, I shot him. When in reality, when, you know, right after it happened, Marshall Yos, who was in charge of this, he said, we don't know who shot him. Nobody knows, but everybody's going to claim it. So here they are. One thing I will say, you know, trying to piece together what happened during, you know, all these episodes that Christie was having to deal with these people, trying to figure out the weather. What are they wearing? What was it like? What was he facing? And so I discovered quite a bit just based on the clothing, their attire. That kind of thing can be very revealing that I think maybe we haven't seen before. This is an example of what newspaper men just love to do. Clearly somebody put a lot of time and effort into making this eye chart kind of thing. And so if you look at these stories, they just go on and on and on. And the headlines, holy cow, they're quite creative, you know. Someday there should be a big montage made of these things. So here are some of the marshals. Peyton Tolbert, he was there. Now the reason I include the picture on the right, it's almost as if the last lawman standing gets to have the last word. So this is Bowden, who told all kinds of stories. Christie shot me in the face and I still have the powder burns. You know, Christie shot me in the leg, he shot me in the arm, but I made it out, you know. And I shot him, by the way. So this article was written, I mean, it was decades after Christie's death, but this is the one that a lot of people point to because it's the last one written. He's the last guy to die. Okay, this is where the majority of the stories about Christie come from. C.H. McKinnon. And if you take a look at the subtitle, it's the saga of the deputy U.S. Marshals who rode the Indian Territory. This guy's a freelance writer. This came out 1967, and he just sat there at that typewriter making things up. I don't know, have any of y'all read this book? Oh boy, it is really something. And it's all about Christie and all the people, surrounding, these adventures. It's an adventure book, essentially. So McKinnon really didn't have a lot of facts that he was working with. He might have a newspaper article and he says, okay, it's written down, must be true, let's go with that. So what he did, he created dialogue between Christie and his wife. He would drop Christie's thoughts right onto the page, so supposedly we know exactly what Christie was thinking at any given time. This book has done a lot of damage. It has done a lot of damage because even the most recent books have picked stuff out of this book. Such as this, The Terror of the Cookson Hills. So if you look at the True West and Wild West and some of these other West magazines, they're very hard to find, incidentally. So if you like to go to garage sales, if you ever find any of those Wild West magazines, you may want to pick them up because they're worth something. People would come up with all kinds of crazy titles for him. He's referred to as a wolf, he's a tiger, he's a this and he's a that. Okay, physicality. The physicality of your bad men and your lawmen is really crucial to your Wild West stories. Villains have to be big and bad. That makes the lawmen who kill them even bigger and badder, doesn't it? You don't want to have some, little wimpy guy that the lawmen killed. That doesn't make the law people look all that impressive. In the 1890s, we start to see the ideal of what men should look like. And this is among the white middle class. And this is when it's really starting 1890s. Instead of being thin and wiry, the ideal is more muscular and rugged. Everybody's got a gun. Can you shoot a bow? Do you have a gun? What can you do physically wise? Boxing and football start taking off. These are expressions of rugged male masculinity. And this is why when we see these stories about Christie being this huge giant, who can, he hits everything he aims at, that kind of thing. This is what we call hairy-chested literature. People love this, and you have to remember that these newspapers are being marketed not towards Indian people. It's not being marketed towards people in Tahlequah, really. It's being marketed towards the people who can afford the newspapers, which is really the white middle class. Okay, so that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. It's during this time of McKinnon. This is John Wayne's heyday, the rise of John Wayne. John Wayne, 6'4", 6'5", big guy. We all know about John Wayne. He's just rough and tough. Nobody gets away from him, right? So this is who these lawmen are patterned after. This is why also, if you ever watch John Wayne movies, the guys he goes up with are mean. They're very mean, and only John Wayne can get rid of them. So this is what McKinnon is thinking, and this is what other Wild West writers are thinking. So this carries on. We got Lee Van Cleef, Clint Eastwood, that's Outlaw Josie Wales, which came a little bit later. Oops. But Chuck Connors in the 50s and 60s, and then we got Jack Palance and Shane, and then the Wild Bunch, right? Ben Jonson and Warren Oates, Ernest Borgnine. And incidentally, in 1970, it was the mid-1970s, I remember my father, who was raised in Muskogee, he said, oh, they're going to make a movie, on Ned Christie. It's like, oh, really? And Ben Jonson was going to be in this movie, and he was going to be Marshall Yos. Okay, so I did not put Charles Bronson in here for a reason. Charles Bronson, as y'all know, most of y'all know, when I talk to my students about this, they don't know who Charles Bronson is. I realize as I get older, these students, our contexts are just completely different. But Charles Bronson, even though he was extremely definitive, right? There's something about him that's very different from these guys. Do y'all know what it is? Well, no, he's Polish. He's Polish. He played Chato's Land, right? But there's, I know he kind of looks like it. Anybody know? It's his physicality. Okay, Will Sampson was going to play Christie. Okay, Charles Bronson was about 5'10". Will Sampson was about 6'5", 6'6", right? So during that time period, he was the guy. He was the Indian actor, right? But then the movie didn't get made, and then he passed away, in the early 1980s, I think. So the movie obviously never did happen. So McKinnon, because of all these things that I just told you about physicality, McKinnon had Christy, he hoists him up to 6'4". That is the first place we see Christy being a tall person, and everybody writes about that. After he died, marshals were chiming in on this, and so a newspaper guy who was there and saw his body, he was strapped to the door, he said, well, he was only about 5'7", maybe 140 pounds. And then also in one of the marshal's memoirs, for a little guy, he sure raised a lot of hell. And he expressed great surprise because he thought, wow, I thought he was going to be much bigger. And I don't like this picture, right? But just very quickly, I wanted to find out, how tall is he? And Roy and I, we've gone back and forth about this, and it's difficult. This may be tomato throwing time, but okay, so this rifle in his hand, that's not his. That rifle belonged to Deputy Hugh Harp, because after Christy was killed, his weapons and everything were just taken. Where they are, we don't know. So the Deputy Hugh Harp said to himself, well, we got to have a picture, the dead outlaw picture with the gun in his hand. That's only right. So that's that's his rifle. So that rifle is 43 inches in length, and it's not his because he uses a carbine. So what I did, there's another picture of him. You've probably seen the picture where it's just him on the backboard, not these guys around him. Take the length of that rifle and take it out, and then you measure it according to him with his feet being a little bit buckled, and he comes out to about 5'7". And so I thought, okay, wait, let me do this another way. So I took this picture, and I got a mathematician friend to help me with this. And so a person who is properly proportioned, 43% of your height is from your inseam to the ground. And so I'm trying to figure out where his knees are, because as you know, that picture is cut off mid-shin. So we take the length of the weapon, and he still comes out to about between 5'7" and 5'8". Now, does it really matter how tall he is? No, it really doesn't. What matters is the Wild West people change his persona. They want to make him bigger for a reason, because the bigger he is, the badder he is. And there are some writings about Christy that make him Bushy Head's bodyguard. Okay, he's just this big, hulking guy that can slam you around. This is why I think Zahn McClarnon would really be good. If there's going to be a movie, if y'all know who Zahn McClarnon is, yes, I think he would be, he fits that. And I also think that he can play mean, he can play kind, he can play calm. That's just my opinion, and I know that through the grapevine that he would love to do it. So I don't know, we'll see. It would be nice to see something like that. I wanted to show you Henry Starr. He also got the big guy treatment. He alone killed over 70 men, fully a dozen having been felled with a single blow of his mighty fist. He was nearly 7 feet tall, massively built, with an arm and a fist like a sledgehammer. Really? Okay, so, and then they talk about these other people, they talk about Bill Pigeon, as being very tall and fluid, he's very graceful. The Cherokee Sheriff Ben Knight. So there's all these descriptions of these Cherokees as being, kind of like Tecumseh. Tecumseh, the Shawnee, he was the guy that everybody admired because he was so good at everything he did. They wanted him dead, but the white people admired him. He was a manly man. The other thing that we see a lot about Christy, and this is very important, is wilderness. You've got to portray him as a man kind of skulking around in the woods, and it satisfies 2 criteria. He's a child of the forest, right? It's this idea of the wilderness is wild, it's mysterious. It's also important because he has to be somebody who can't deal with civilization. He knows nothing about music or reading or the arts. He just comes out, kills people, and then creeps back, to where he came from. And also, by the time that he dies, like I mentioned before, the frontier is really starting to close. The bison are almost gone, and the wilderness is quickly fading. And people want to hang on to this. They want more wilderness. They need more wilderness. So this is why we have stories, this Wild West literature. All these guys are out in box canyons, high cliffs, tent cities. They're in places where you can't find them. And it's up to our intrepid lawmen to go find them. It's because they can find them no matter where they go. And of course, the great irony is, he's in plain sight, basically. Y'all know that this, at the top of the hill, looking north and south, this is where his lookout was. And it wasn't a castle, it was 10 by 10, a stone thing where he could look out and see the surrounding area. But if you take a look at how it is portrayed, you would think it's like this building or something, and he's got all these people surrounding him, and guns are pointing out of every single window or something. And this is where his house was, maybe where that cow is right now. So there wasn't anything particularly mysterious about where Christie lived. He had to rebuild his house, and it was a very sturdy, substantial cabin. He had gardens. Through all this documentation that I was looking through, I saw receipts with Nancy Christie's name on it because they were selling their produce to people in town. So they're just basically getting by. They're surviving. So during this 5 years when he's being pursued, he's trying to be a normal person. He's not just crouched down in a cave someplace. But that is not how he is being portrayed. You would think he lived here, right? He's up there and he can just shoot down at you. Right? So you can see how this is quite the feat for the marshals to finally get him, if it actually was something like this. Exaggerations and data manipulation. All right, if you want to know about Christie, you're going to have this book, right? But there's a problem just right off the bat with the title, The Last Cherokee Warriors. Really? Were they the last Cherokee warriors? If we consider warriors, right, we can have this a big broad term. There have been Cherokee warriors long before these men were born and long after these men passed away. Cherokees have fought in every war with and against the United States government, prior to fighting with them, I suppose. And today we have activists. We have people who are fighting for treaty rights and sovereignty, environmentalists, people fighting, against identity theft, fraud, right? You got doctors, you got lawyers, you got grassroots, people who are trying to make lives better. We went to the Cherokee National Treasures last night. Thank you, Roy. And it's really evident people trying to keep culture alive, and in doing so, you're being a warrior and an activist, trying to keep your culture going, for the next generation. So I think this title is misleading, and that's just my opinion. The other thing that I think is worrisome, well, there's other things worrisome about it, but he said he got a lot of his information from Christie's nephew, Bill Jr. And he has all these stories that he credits to Bill Jr. because he claims that Bill Jr. was there for every shootout. He lived in Christie's home. He knew him very well, had all these conversations with him. But Bill Jr. was only 2 years old when Christie was killed. So you have to pay close attention to who people are saying they're getting their information from. And Philip Steele got a lot of his stuff from McKinnon. So if we follow then this line of writing, we get to Bonnie Spear. And as we can see, there's more than one problem on the cover. I mean, who puts a dead person on the cover of their book? That's very troubling. But on the inside of the book, she wants to make him innocent, but she doesn't do it very well. She's trying to do this, but she just does not do a good job of it. She calls it Cherokee outlaw. So which is it? Is he a Cherokee outlaw or is he innocent? So she's trying to appeal, I think, to all audiences, perhaps. Whenever I start writing about something, I always look at every single note of an author's book. So that's what I did with this one. Well, here's an article that she wrote, Wolf of the Cookson Hills. Okay. So, as Roy knows, I'd say, oh, Roy, oh my gosh, look, I looked this up and this is what it really said. So this book is totally torn to shreds now. I went through every note, every footnote in that book, and this is just kind of a snippet. The dates are wrong. She takes time, she'll write about something and then she'll plug it into a completely wrong time period to suit her narrative. I traveled to the places where she said she went. I went to Wyoming, I went to Washington, D.C., and I couldn't find where she said she got these things. A lot of the notes she had, were fabricated. So I just want to urge caution that you can't believe everything you read, and granted, if you read my book, you're not going to believe all of that either, and I want you to look up the notes and do your own research, but some things are just easy to track down. It's very time consuming, but some things are just plain wrong, and they do the subject great disservice, which is very, very sad, I thought. The Christie as the outlaw myth is a comfort story. It is a comfort story because many people need to be emotionally reassured about the valor of their lawman heroes. Many people need to know that the ending of the story is going to have good triumphing over evil. This is why we see the stories that we do about him. The good lawmen have defeated the bad guy. So people need to read about Christie, and they want to continue to read about Christie. They don't necessarily want to read that he was innocent, because that's going to screw them up, right? Kind of messes up their idea of what they want him to be. Now, the other thing that I mentioned right at the get-go here was that this is not just about Christie. This story is not just about him. It did not just occur to him in a little bubble and nothing else was going on. What happened to him strongly impacted many, many other people in some very horrifying ways, actually. After he died, his family just, the grief, the trauma, the stress, now what are we going to do? This was a ripple. Once again, this is a ripple that just kept going out and out and out right up until today. Arch Wolf was in the house in November 1892 when the posse came for the last time. That's his father on the left and him on the right with his shackles, right? You've probably seen this picture. There's not a lot of information about what actually Arch was doing then, because the lawmen who wrote about this final event don't even mention him. So I'm starting to think that perhaps Arch Wolf maybe got off a shot and then he left, because he was not there when this was all said and done. But to make a very long story short, once they did get a hold of him, the reason I think that Arch was convicted, I think that he very easily could have been let go. Nancy had been married to somebody before she got married to Ned. She left him. He got very angry. So he created this story that Arch Wolf tried to kill him. And so he submitted this complaint to the courts, and he submitted it to a marshal named Gideon White. And so Gideon White, that nothing became of it. He said, yeah, he shot me 3 times. So Gideon White kept a hold of this. So after Christie is killed, he takes this, and this is just more fuel for the fire to try to get anybody who is associated with Christie. And they use this as part of the case against Arch Wolf. He was a kid, he was only a teenager. Charles Hare was even younger, and he's the young man, right, who was terribly burned. So he was convicted to 2 years hard labor. It was actually, it's 36 months. He had 2 different charges of selling liquor. It wasn't like he was selling, a wagon load of booze. He probably just had a couple of bottles. It's very interesting how they're sort of equating assault with an attempt to kill with selling liquor, right? Because the sentencing is very similar, right? So here he goes to Kings County Pen in Brooklyn. He has a very hard time there, as you might imagine. And he becomes rather despondent. So they send him to the government's hospital for the insane. It's later named St. Elizabeth's. This is in Washington, D.C., and there's no apostrophe in Elizabeth's, incidentally. By this time, he's 21. And so I went up there and I got his ward notes. And the ward notes are the notes that the doctors and nurses, they observe, their insane patients, throughout the day. This is what we fed him. This is what he's doing. And one thing that they did to people who were supposedly insane during this time period was to give them an enormous number of laxatives. I mean, it sounds, snicker, but honestly, they gave him laxatives not once a day, but sometimes twice a day. This had a tremendous effect on his health. He was dehydrated, you could tell, because they say his lips are always dry. He seems very thin. He's very weak. He doesn't want to eat. Well, no wonder. This is the stuff that they gave him. They gave him stuff called blue mass, which has mercury in it. And this is the same thing that Abraham Lincoln took. Because Abraham Lincoln was, he suffered from Great Depression. This just made it worse. So this just made it worse for Arch. They also said that he's very quiet, he never speaks. Well, who's he going to speak to? English is not his first language. There's nobody to talk to. So no wonder he's just sitting over there, very quiet. There's nobody to converse with, and he's just getting sadder and sadder. So I looked at all the letters that came from the family, and the family was just, oh my gosh, I remember sitting there reading these things, and it was his father, other members of the family saying, we miss him so much, please send him home. Can he come home now? We're getting older, we want to see him. Just very short, sweet letters. No, he was not going to come home, he never came home. And the Cherokees had the asylum, deaf, dumb, blind, and insane. And Cherokees were making an argument. Send him here. Send him here. We'll take care of him here. No, they would not allow that. So after he spends, he actually has gone way beyond his initial time of confinement there at St. Elizabeth's. And instead of letting him go, no, they send him to Canton Asylum for Insane Indians in Canton, South Dakota, which later became known as Hiawatha Asylum. It's no longer there, and he eventually died there. He died in 1912, which means he spent 17 years of his life in insane asylums, and he was not insane. That building has been torn down. If you know anything about the Merriam Report that was written in the 1920s, they had a section on Canton, because this was the place where they sent the troublesome Indians. If you were an outspoken Indian woman, and if you were on a reservation and you were always giving the Indian agent trouble, that's where you went. I mean, they had women there. I mean, some of us probably, may have been sent there. They were not going to tolerate anybody who's outspoken. They also sent men who were the very troublesome guys. Hey, you're insane, buddy. They sent you there. And I met a woman who's done an enormous amount of work here on Canton, and she sent me all the files. And it's just very interesting reading through them, because these people clearly aren't insane. The doctor who ended up being kind of in control of all these people, he would create all these maladies that people had, some of these things you've never even heard of. And so hundreds of people died there. Once you checked in, you very rarely came out. Today, all of the Indians who died there are buried in between the 4th and 5th holes of the Hiawatha Golf Course, there on the right. There's no individual markers. And, we had talked about how nice it'd be to go up and, put a marker, where Arch is, but you can't. I mean, if you want to leave flowers, you attach it to the fence. I know that every few years, representatives from tribes around the country make a pilgrimage here, because there were Indians from all over the place who had to go there. So it was a very horrible, shocking kind of ending, I think, to Arch Wolfe, who did not deserve that. And in many respects, I think it was worse than what happened to Christy. I mean, he was a young man, there he went. So I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to leave you just with a few other things. My feeling, there really wasn't any proof that Christy killed Maples. Other men had lengthy criminal records, very lengthy, and they continued to act badly afterwards. I mean, Bub Traynor just kept on doing things. I mean, he just wouldn't stop. He's just sort of like this little brat that just keeps on going. Paris ended up going to the pen for doing more things. There always is going to be revenge if a U.S. Marshal or any kind of lawman is killed, we know that today, don't we? So even if they can't get the person who actually did it, they're going to get somebody. They are just not going to give up ever. Those who want Christy to be innocent, they engage in bias scholarship. I don't think you have to try as hard as Bonnie Spear did to see that somebody else probably did this. You know, we don't have time to get into the Humphrey theory, but I can tell you that my feeling after all this, I think it was John Paris who did it. I don't think it was Bub Traynor, although I think they were probably together. After he got out of jail in 1890, he left Indian Territory. We don't see anything more about him. I mean, unless somebody's related to him and you know what happened to him, he's gone. He left. And I think that he skedaddled for a reason, you know. Bub Traynor, he died in 1896. You know, he kind of died the way he lived. I also think that Bub Traynor, we don't hear a whole lot about Bub Traynor, and there's some very good reasons for that. His father, Thomas Traynor, was a white guy. In fact, I think Bub Traynor was 1/16 Cherokee, and this was in the 1890s, right? So, you know, we've got a long history of intermarriage with that family. He clearly was not a Kituah. And the father got drunk one evening and tried to kill a sheriff. And the sheriff ended up shooting him, killing him, and he died. So instead of the newspapers saying, and yes, Thomas Traynor, you know, he's the father of the guy who probably killed Dan Maples, they say, oh, poor Thomas Traynor, you know, this is just such a bad day for him. So there was a lot of sympathy for this Traynor family. The other thing about Traynor is his sister Anna ended up marrying the Indian agent of the Union Agency, Leo K. Bennett. Leo K. Bennett was the agent in charge during the time that all of this was going on in the Choctaw Nation, during the time that they're coming after Christy. So he is married to Bub Traynor's sister. So he is able to give all this information to Washington. We don't know what he's saying, right? I mean, he's got a vested interest, you might think. Anna also becomes Miss Indian Territory. She's Miss Twin Territories, if you look her up. She's in the Chronicles of Oklahoma. There's some pictures of her. I think she ended up being married 7 times or 5 times or something, but she was a very prominent socialite. So history looks more favorably on Traynor on basis of his family. And his mother had been a courier during the Civil War. So I think there were some people in high places who kind of liked her, perhaps. So let's see. I don't know. There's some other stuff here. I also thought I might tell you one thing that Bonnie Spear does is she says that the Cherokee National Council was in session when the Cherokee Female Seminary burned down. Well, that isn't true. The seminary burned down. The council took care of the seminary. In fact, you know, Ned, along with the other guys, got on the horses, rode to Park Hill, checked it out, came back, decided what to do. Then they went back home. Then he came back for the May session. So there's over a 2-week period between the seminary and Maples. So it really doesn't have any bearing on that. So I don't know what else I can tell you right now because it's time, I guess, and you have other people. But if anybody has any questions. Bob Connolly? Well, Bob Connolly.
The question, because we can't all hear.
She wanted to know about Robert Connolly's book. Well, Connolly, of course, you know, he would be an ally here. You know, he was very interested in, you know, Christy, and he saw him as innocent. I think that he repeated some of the things that he saw in Spear. You know, McMurtry, Bobby McMurtry, he's a cousin of the family. He had that comic, which was actually quite a beautiful comic. He was very sympathetic to Christy as well, but he also repeated some of the things that may not have been true. So that's what I mean by even if you're sympathetic, sometimes it's not quite correct. So does it matter? You know, it just depends how accurate, you know, you want to be.
I was wondering because
Right. There's all kinds of stories of him, just a guy, he's a family man. I mean, he's very concerned about his tribe. He's concerned about what's happening to his tribe, and he just got caught up in this big quagmire. And it's like, what is he going to do? So his last 5 years of his life trying to survive, basically, because he's got a family. He's got to think of his family. It's not just him out there by himself. Yeah, there's a hand.
Where was his home?
Wahila. It's not Rabbit Trap. A lot of people think, he was in Rabbit Trap. So it's just down how far from here? How many miles? Roy, how far is miles? About 10 miles? Yeah. Yeah, so you can look it up and just drive by, and you can go by where his marker is, his headstone.
Hello,
Hello.
my name's Farina King, and I'm not from this region. I have family in the Southwest. I'm Navajo on my dad's side. So what I'm interested in after hearing this presentation is you talked about what the different tall tales and the stories of Christie. But what I didn't hear, and I'm not aware of because I'm not as familiar with these histories, is what are the Cherokee and indigenous communities? What were the stories they passed on about Christie? Did they buy this literature or whatever about him and the stories? Like, what kind of stories were being passed on, or the way he was being portrayed by his own communities and those interconnected?
Right, well, that's the whole other part of the book. That's why it's the creation of an outlaw. I analyze that, and a Cherokee hero. So, yes, because Cherokees have very, definite feelings about him, because surviving the Trail of Tears, that family, they would congregate in Watts, I don't know if it was a barn or his blacksmith shop, because he was a metal worker, and then Go Back Christie was, a woodworker. So these guys would all get together and they would talk about what is happening to our people, what can we do about this? And this is why many of the Christie people became very involved in politics. How are we going to solve this problem? I mean, they're not thinking we're going to go out there and start blasting people. They're trying to think very carefully about what are we going to do. And so, as time goes by, and this thing happens to him where he is accused of killing a marshal, and there's so many things wrong with him being accused, because a very good, astute attorney could really take that argument apart. He just didn't get that opportunity. And the Cherokees see him as a hero because he fought for the rights. He was a warrior. They also have a lot of other stories, about him. There's some stories I did not, write down because it's not my place to write down some of those things. But they have very, very strong feelings towards him. I didn't really answer your question very thoroughly, but there's plenty of Christie people in here who could tell you a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, and there's a really good episode of OCO TV that also features Christie descendants as well. That's a good kind of overview, a fairly superficial overview of how Cherokee people feel about, and done and produced by Cherokee people about Cherokee freedom fighter named Christie.
Right. I will tell you that, and this, once again, this is where I expect to, somebody's going to get me for this, but I don't believe, let me see, I hope it's here. Oops, I'm going the wrong way, aren't I? The Humphrey theory. We don't have time, but I have a very long chapter on this Humphrey theory where it was 1918, an article came out in the Daily Oklahoman in which they're saying that, Humphrey came forward to say that he saw Bub Traynor kill Ned Christie. Well, this was actually the third article that came out. Most people look at this article, but there were actually two others that came before it, and they're all playing off of each other. And so you can dissect this and see that this could not have happened. It could not have happened the way, and Humphreys didn't come forward. He did not. And I defend that simply based on all the stuff that I have found. I mean, it just goes on and on. It was May. He did not have on a heavy coat. You're not going to put a quart of whiskey inside a very light jacket. You know, it's just all kinds of clues that point to that reality, that this could not have happened. Also, Bub Traynor, you know, he died in 1896, so what was Humphrey afraid of? You know, if he was going to come forward, he should have done it, you know, way before that time. So anyway, if anybody ever wants to discuss that, but like I said, there's a whole chapter on this. I don't think you need this to exonerate him. It's just not necessary. I think, like I said, somebody who's a very good, you know, investigator, somebody who's a good attorney could find him innocent, I think. So that's my view. So is there anything else? I know you have another thing coming up. I should be getting the galleys like this evening, and then I have to go through all of that and then index it and all that stuff. So I think it's around the first of the year. It's just a huge, long process. But I just happened to get the cover a little bit early. So if you have any questions or concerns or, you know, anything you want to tell me, you can email me. Scream at me out on the sidewalk, maybe. I don't know. That's it.